All right. Well, on this episode of The Christ-Centered Life, we're going to kick things off with a little problem. Now, you are one who loves
A
math.
math problem. Sort of, not really a math problem.
It's a formula, really.
It's a formula. It represents the kind of problem that I don't actually like, though.
Right. So, this formula is one that we have come up with to be able to.
Should we name it? Should it be like the Allen formula?
Let me get the Sharpie.
You know, should it be? Well, I think we need a cooler name than the Allen formula.
Okay.
It should be like the DLA squared formula or something. I don't know.
All right. We'll see if we
We'll
can
work
come
on
up
the
with it.
maybe some of our listeners could recommend a name.
Maybe so.
So
All right. So the formula is one that we have devised, but it's definitely we're just naming things.
it's a
here.
lot of research
Yeah.
went into this, a lot of thought. What is it? It was in our kitchen this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, we put at least 5-6 minutes of thought into this formula.
Right.
So it is. This is highly tested, really highly scrutinized, peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Because we reviewed it,
Sure.
and you're my peer.
Sure.
So this is a peer reviewed formula.
This is a great lesson in how you should always perk up when they say experts say.
Right.
You know,
Experts say.
Al Mohler always teaches
experts
us that.
say.
So experts have said that this formula is helpful and accurate. So here's the formula. For those of you who have the video, you can see it here.
All right. Can I read it for those who don't have
Yeah,
the video?
so you read it for those.
All right, so it is SC onto GPM minus IR equals to frowny face.
That's right.
That is the formula.
That is the formula. And
But we need to explain and define terms.
Yeah, we're gonna-
expand out this formula.
yeah, we're going to define some terms. So SC stands for sexualized culture.
Okay, so that just is the general sexualized culture
Yeah.
that we all live in. It is the water we swim in 21st century Western culture, especially American culture.
Yes. And then the GPM on the inside of our parentheses stands for growing physical maturity.
I feel like we're losing people who hate math, but hey, hang with us. I think you're really going to like
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
So
Hold on.
Growing physical maturity. So we got sexualized culture onto growing physical maturity, but
we're
something is
subtracting
subtracted from the growing physical maturity.
Yeah, we're taking away the increased responsibility, the
Yes.
IR.
And then what does your frowny face
And
stand
that
for?
equals disaster.
Disaster.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
My frowny
So
face means disaster.
let me break this down for our non-math people. As experts have said, when you take
right here.
growing physical maturity, all right, so we're talking about 10, 11, 12-year-olds and all the way through 17, 18-year-olds. So your body's growing. Everybody understands that. So growing physical maturity. But then you subtract increased responsibility. Because what ought to happen is as physical ability increases, responsibility should increase.
Yeah.
So you've got growing physical ability, but you have, instead of increased responsibility, you have decreased responsibility. So in our formula, we're subtracting out the increased responsibility that ought to come along with this.
Yeah.
So all that would be a problem. That would be a big problem in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
When you take that and you multiply it, and it is a multiplication factor.
is.
It's something that increases this
It
problem.
might have even been an exponent.
It probably should be an exponent that increases this problem dramatically, is the sexualized culture this is taking place in.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we tell maybe a little story of how this works out? Let's just take random 13-year-old. We'll pick on boys first.
Okay.
All right, so random 13-year-old boy. What's happening in random 13-year-old boy's life?
All right, so in random 13-year-old boy's life, he's getting taller, he's getting stronger.
1 week he talks like this. The next week he's like, "Hey, mom."
Yes, he's growing
things are
armpit
changing.
hair.
Yep.
He smells really bad without the help
first,
of deodorant.
He smells really bad at first, and then he starts to smell like,
Yeah,
he actually cares
he
about how he
starts to care.
smells.
Yeah.
He's getting taller.
Yes.
Muscle structure's growing.
Yes.
And also that comes along with other changes in his body that prepare him to be a husband and father.
Right.
All right, so all that's happening in 13-year-old's life.
Yes.
Okay, and then on our story representing our formula here, what's not happening in 13-year-old's life?
Yeah. So what's not happening is he's not helping out with the responsibilities of the family. He's not using that strength to be able to provide assistance to the family. He's not using his stature to be able to reach things and get things and help out. He's not contributing to the work of the household. He's not contributing in any way to his own productivity as far as earning any sort of income or even just feeding his mind. His mind is growing too, and so in our formula, this young man is not feeding his mind. In fact, he's often wasting his mind by watching and looking at things that are garbage.
Also, I would say he's not growing in respect. So by the time that you're increasing in size and you're growing physically, that's when there needs to be an expectation. And think about how opposite this is in our culture. We ought to expect more respect out of a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old. But in our culture, we've actually said to teenagers, hey, this is the time when you're going to be rebellious, you're going to be disrespectful, you're allowed to yell at your parents because that's just what teenagers do. No, he ought to be growing in learning to control his emotions and learning to speak respectfully. So that's not happening. He's not being expected. And this is responsibility, meaning that somebody would have to give these things to him or expect these things of them. And this is not happening.
And when you think about if, specifically with 13-year-old boy, young man, if the formula were, fixed, but boy as it is, these kids have the opportunity to be able to contribute in a way that they haven't before. Up until this point, they've needed parents, assistant, guardians to be able to help them with so many things and do things for them. But at this point, there's so much they could do for themselves, but because they're not doing it, other people are still having to do those things. So they're sitting on the couch watching mom or dad or grandmother or aunt do things that they could very easily get up and do in order to be a blessing and a contribution to the family.
And, it's time, like you said, not only to do it for yourself, but to be a blessing to the family, to contribute in significant ways. So like when your kids are 6, you give them ways to help, but it actually, requires more of you to help them help than it does to actually help you. But by the time, kids are 13, 12, 13, 14, they can really benefit the family. I mean, they can actually help the household to function, and your household should function much better when your kids are that age than it did when you're younger.
Right.
There's also another area that I think that it contributes to this subtraction of increased responsibility. That is when parents jump in and do schoolwork or solve problems, like get them out of jams. And carefully, we ought to be careful about that. We do need to help our kids out of jams, but like jumping in and making sure, he's going to fail this. He's going to fail this test. He's going to fail this assignment. So I'm going to jump in and just do it for him.
Yeah, the lack of natural consequences.
Allowing those, delaying the natural consequences that come from not having done a good job, that decreases responsibility. So that subtracts from the increased responsibility.
Yeah.
So
and then throw all that
things,
into the...
So that's all happening.
Yeah.
So you've got 13-year-old. Nobody's expecting anything different from him. Nobody's expecting him to be a respectful young man. No one's expecting him to contribute significantly to the family, like in this way. And I will give a testimony to both of our boys who are older. We have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, about to be 17-year-old.
Yeah.
So we have 17-year-old.
Just hours away.
And I said 13, 12. So we have a about to be 17, and a 12-year-old, and then we have a 14-year-old daughter. All of them would be in this range. Our 2 youngers, this does not necessarily apply to them. But I will say, for me personally, I'm already like dreading the days my boys move out.
I know.
Because they do so much around our house, and they contribute significantly to what happens at our house and how our house functions. So, but let's say that that's not happening in this 13-year-old boy's life, but he's increasing in physical ability, the responsibilities going down. He's going to do something with that new physical ability.
Yeah.
That new physical ability is going to be invested somewhere. So there's no increased responsibility. And then all of that, this particular boy that we're talking about is just being bombarded by, this is that made-up boy. He is being bombarded by a sexualized culture.
Yeah.
Everywhere he turns, it's yes, a lot of visual sexual images, but there's more going on than just, images, even pornography or movies that are trying to grab the attention of his eyes. We're not only talking about those kind of things. We're talking about other things too.
Yeah. And we're going to look at that a little more specifically when we think about what led to the problem. So we know the problem. We've addressed the problem. I think we all understand.
I don't think we've addressed equals to disaster.
That's true. That's true.
So it equals to what kinds of disasters?
So when we've talked a lot about boys, this problem is not just for boys.
Right.
This equation applies to young girls as well. But the disaster that comes is, to put it biblically, death.
Death.
It brings death in every possible way. It robs them of what would be called innocence. It robs them of the joy of childhood, and even growing into a responsible young adult. It robs them of the joys that come with living an honest life and contributing and being a part of something and seeing the way that God designed you and using those gifts and those skills for a purpose that brings life.
It leads to delayed adolescence. It leads to stealing from them. You talked about robbing them of the joy of childhood. It robs them of the joy of what the teenage years ought to look like.
Yeah.
Robs them of their place in the family. It robs them of their future family. So these kind of things like contribute to the fact of delayed adolescence, delayed marriage, delayed parenting,
which
all
leads,
those things.
That leads to added stress on the other people in the family.
Right.
So when they're not doing their part, then that means somebody else is having to do their part, which adds stress and work on those people.
And then just culturally, to take it out, so it starts, you got death in some areas of joy for the individual, death in areas of joy for the family. And then culture-wide.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit, but we're in the process of signing our own death warrant as a culture because of the birth rate.
Yeah.
Well, all of this contributes to that low birth rate.
Right.
So disaster in every sphere that you can really think
lack
of.
of valuing family and marriage the way that God designed and created it. Lack of valuing human life. And all of the things that come along with that, all the implications that come along with that. And we'll talk about some of those things in this next section.
So that's the formula. That's the problem.
Yeah.
In our time today, we want to walk through and kind of unpack this a little bit.
Yeah. So what led to the problem? We know we have the formula here. We know we have the problem. What led to this moment? What has contributed to this? I think there are several things and kind of an overall big thing to think about. And we'll talk a little more about it as we go, is the over-sexualized images that we all are privy to through video, through people walking around.
Yeah.
Even in church. We're not immune to it in church. Billboards. I mean, you name it, you're going to see.
And it's not just images over-sexualized. It's over-sexualized discussions, things you hear on the radio. It's just kind of like, it seems like everywhere you go, our culture is obsessed with sex.
Yeah.
For men, it kind of mostly comes out in images, but it's so much more than that.
Right.
It's the way that a woman's voice sounds on a commercial as she's trying to get you to buy some product. It's the way that it's just everything, not just in the media, but like you said, that has filtered its way into real life. Hard to say, isn't it? Is art imitating life, or is life imitating art?
Being influenced by art, yeah.
And probably the answer is yes.
Right.
But we see that all around us. I think we would be shocked if suddenly we were transported back to the 1940s.
Yeah.
The 1740s. I think we would almost instantly see the massive blind spot that we have in our culture over this over-sexualized
It would be
thing.
an embarrassment.
Yeah, we would automatically go, whoa, okay, we've really, or even just if we're transported to some other cultures in the world who don't kind of have this this blind spot in their culture.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. But there's another really important piece that's kind of stereotypically, although not only, But stereotypically on the male side of things, there's another part of this.
Yeah, the other component is the over-romanticized idea of sex. And this comes from the ideas that, all the childhood princess movies pour into our
Right.
brains, all of the just every reality show you could possibly imagine that is supposed to end with a perfect happy couple walking off into the sunset. That over romanticized idea of what sex is supposed to be. And then that is fed into our culture as well, these expectations of what that's supposed to look like.
Even, down to the Disney movies, and we're not here bashing Disney movies. Every movie I'm about to talk about, our kids have watched. So we're not here saying, "Hey, you're a bad parent if your kids watch these movies." But the other day, I was having a conversation with one of our children, and so I was saying, "Hey, let's walk through the Disney movies." And I said, "So tell me about Snow White." And, well, here's the problem with Snow White. Here's what happens in Snow White. And I said, how are Snow White's problems solved? Well, Prince Charming, is that the right prince? Okay. I always get them confused.
Well, yes.
So Prince Charming shows up and fixes the problem. And how does he fix the problem? Well, they're in love. Okay. And then, so I asked the question, how long had they known each other? How many encounters had they had before they were, quote, in love? Well, it's very few. They had this one brief encounter. He shows back up. All of a sudden, they're in love. All of her problems are fixed.
Right.
So I said, okay, tell me about the story of Cinderella. And so we walked through that, and so I said, okay, well, like, what fixed it? Well, the prince fixed it. Okay, how did the prince and Cinderella know they were in love? Well, they danced together one night, one time. Bam, we're in love. So tell me about the Little Mermaid. I mean, we just walked down the line, and like,
you actually brought up an even deeper detail in that a song was involved in every one of those initial encounters.
oh yeah, there's always songs. Yes, there's a song involved at every
They
time.
sang a song, they fell in love.
And so I think that even though those cartoons are not obviously there's not sex happening in those cartoons, that idea of marriage and sex being tied to this romantic moment, that's what it looks like to fall in love and to find the one that you marry is this romantic moment. And so that adds mostly stereotypically on the female side, that adds to this sexualized culture.
So those two things combined really do build that culture, and then those things being not only allowed but celebrated, and then introduced younger and younger. And we'll talk about that some more in a little bit. Some other things that led to the problem are the undoing of God's created order. So God created sex to be something that would bring joy and pleasure to one man and one woman inside of a marriage relationship with one another, and He created that in that order. And what we have done is we have said, well, we want to be able to have the pleasure of sex, but not the commitment of marriage or the consequences of sex, which would be procreation and children. And so, so when we take those things out of the created order that God has given us, that really builds into this equation here.
I think it's interesting. There are really like two mistakes you can make when it comes to this. You can say, I want the pleasure of sex, but I don't want it inside of marriage, the commitment of marriage. Then you can also, and the church has done this, that you can say, well, we need to have the sex because that leads to procreation, but the pleasure's got to go. And I think that even can work its way into like dead marriages, right, where there's no idea of pleasure within in sex inside of marriage, and that is not God's design.
No.
God's design, and we see it then reflected back in the culture where all of the good sex happens before marriage.
Right.
And after marriage, well, that's just the bad sex.
Right.
And it never happens, and there's none of that inside of marriage. So all of that has created this over-sexualized culture and has pushed these ideas younger and younger.
Yeah. What's another thing that you've seen that's like?
The expecting sexual activity, sometimes it's a surrender to, well, younger and younger people are going to have sex or going to be sexually involved. Sometimes it's an encouragement of. Mm-hmm. I've seen both, where, well, younger and younger people are going to look at pornography. They're going to experience and experiment with things sexually, and there's nothing we can do to stop that. Or, hey, we ought to really encourage this. at younger and younger ages.
Or if it's going to happen, we need to make sure they know how to do this a safe way.
Right.
And,
It's because we can't stop it, then we need to make sure that that they're doing this safely. To the ridiculous point that we are teaching kids like 10, 11, 12 years old to have safe sex.
right.
Okay, there's no safe sex outside of marriage. There's certainly no safe sex for an 11 and 12-year-old.
Right.
What in the world would safe sex look like for an 11 and 12-year-old? I mean, we're pushing that boundary back down. And yes, I know there are some cultures, even biblical cultures, where that marriage was happening at those ages, but that's where the increased responsibility piece comes in.
Yeah.
We do not put on to 10, 11, 12-year-olds any other responsibilities, but somehow we take this massive responsibility and we hand it to them as though they're going to be able to handle it.
Right.
Without expecting them to increase responsibilities in any other area. So
And I'll even
that's another
say,
place I've seen it.
10, 11, and 12 is even becoming older because they are pushing a lot of this curriculum nationwide in our education system that introduces ideas and concepts as early as kindergarten.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, 10, 11, and 12 is actually, old hat in some of these conversations. And then also just the success for people modern day is oftentimes for parents is defined by performance rather than ability.
Yes.
And so when we
This goes to the the lack of increased responsibility.
right.
Because if I increase responsibility, there's an increased chance for failure.
Right.
So as the parent, I've got to remove that chance for failure.
Mm-hmm. So we're valuing success over actual growth and ability.
Yeah.
And how we define success is don't fail.
And so let's give an illustration of that, because I think this may be a hard concept for people to grasp and if we don't communicate it clearly. So what would that look like? I'm focusing, if I'm as a parent or even as a culture, and I think this permeates our culture probably in many different areas. What would it look like to focus on success instead of ability, or performance instead of growth?
So I think one great way to look at it is with academics. So in academics, if you've got a child who has an assignment for, let's just say, a science experiment, science fair, the temptation there is, well, I want my kid to win the science fair, so I'm going to make sure that the poster looks organized. I'm going to print everything for him or her. I'm going to cut everything out. I'm going to glue it where it needs to be. I'm going to do the research. I'm just going to dictate to that child, here's what you're going to do, and turn it in. And then I'm going to help you do a lot of it even.
Because what's important in that is not that the child actually learns how to do a science experiment and learns and gains the ability of presentation skills and gains the ability of conducting experimentation. What's important there is that the child succeeds.
Right, that wins.
Wins.
Yeah.
Yes, does well.
Yeah.
And so instead of letting the child, the 13, 14-year-old do it on his or her own, and then, you know what? Maybe they don't win. Maybe they don't even do a good job. Maybe they actually make a C on the project for the science fair, but they did it on their own and they have to live with those consequences.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about. And listen, there's a balance, right?
Yeah.
We all come in and encourage and support, and there's not a parent out there who hasn't done these late night projects to, okay, let's get this across the finish line.
Sure.
But I was going to say some points, I would say at most points, you've just got to let it be, because the longer you extend that, if you do that for them at 12, 13, you're going to be doing it for them at 14, 15, 16, 17. You're going to be writing their college papers to make sure, because my goodness, they can't drop below a 4.0 in college. They've got to keep that scholarship, or they've got to get those grades up in order to get into the medical school or the law school you want them to get into.
Yeah.
And so, man, we have to kind of come around and make this happen. All the while, the performance is up here, but the ability is down here, and the responsibility is way down here.
Yeah. So the better thing to do would be to tie consequences to the outcomes that you want to see increase. Like if you want to see them perform better, help them grow in their ability. Help them grow in their ability so that they can perform better. And by no means just say, oh, well, you were terrible at the science fair, so you're just not a scientist and we're just going to forget about it. No, tie some responsibility, some consequences and rewards to those actions and those abilities, and give them something to work for.
One of the things we say in leadership development is we say failure is necessary, absolutely necessary. I think everybody understands that, but nobody wants to fail. So we say fail early, fail cheaply.
Right.
So fail in the early stages,
Yeah.
but if you don't allow those failures at 11, 12, 13, the failures are going to get more and more expensive as you go.
Yeah.
Also, something else that led to the problem is just the absence of men. We're going to talk about in just a moment this kind of like romantic lie. I think the absence of men in the equation, or men kind of stepping back and just saying, okay, well, whatever, don't either, I'm not in the picture at all, or I don't want to make my wife mad. I don't want to lead spiritually. I don't want my children to be mad at me or not like me or something like that. And so men just kind of step back, and even we're very complementarian. We believe that men are the spiritual leaders of the home, spiritual leaders of the church. And so when you have men leading, that is the way God ordered and designed it. What a lot of people don't understand is that men don't really want to lead many times. A lot of our temptation is to pull back from the very thing God called us to do. And so men stepping back, even men who are in the home, stepping back from leadership, and these things kind of flourish in that arena.
Yeah. And then finally, that idea that we've already hinted on a little bit here is that women have often been caught up in those lies that have been sold to them as little girls, of this romanticized version of what relationships are supposed to look like, and the standard and the goal of what everything must be in order for it to be quote unquote love.
Yeah, Snow White didn't come out last year.
Right.
Snow White's came out, the 60s, I think?
Yeah.
And so maybe even earlier.
Well, and the Grimm's fairy tales were way before that.
Right. So this idea built into culture of this is what these things are supposed to be like. I do think it's been heightened. I think it's been heightened because of the ability of media to portray things that that have no basis in reality in an even more realistic way. Mm-hmm. So Snow White has no basis in reality. Nobody talks to the animals, that kind of thing. But back then, it's a cartoon. Now, I mean, it looks extremely real. It looks like your life, except it's better. It's more romantic. It's more sensual, not in a sexualized nature, but in a romanticized nature. And it looks just like normal life. But and so that blurred line between reality and fantasy gets closer and closer, and less, more and more blurred until you really can't see the line anymore.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that led to this problem. How do we solve this equation? How do we solve this problem?
Yeah. First, I think I don't know that this is on the list. We got to realize this is a problem.
Yeah.
We do see this lived out in, I just have to ask, are we going to talk about promposals?
I could talk about that.
Maybe I should talk about it.
Maybe you should talk about it.
Okay, so promposals and then hoco propo.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so promposals and then homecoming proposals. We want to be really clear. We have an official stance at the Christ-Centered Life about promposals and hoco propo. And if you don't know what either of those are, you're not hip to the groove, you're not with it, we'll tell you in just a minute. But we want to be really clear. We do not think that these are sinful or that you can't do these things. I hope everybody hears me say this. For some reason, somehow, people around our church, some people around our church, kind of in the outer orbit of our church, have said, well, Derek and Lindsay say if you drink alcohol, you're going to hell. Right. We've never said that. We don't believe that. So don't hear us saying that homecoming proposals or prom proposals are somehow inherently sinful, so that any time you would ever do them, they would always be sinful. but we do have concerns about what they're communicating about the overall culture.
Yeah.
They're kind of a fruit of a bigger problem. The fruit itself, probably not that big of a deal.
Right.
So what is a hoco-propo, homecoming proposal? I don't even know if the kids call it hoco-propo, but I do. And if they don't, they should. So this is where, in order to go to homecoming with somebody, the guys got to do like a big deal. Hey, will you go to homecoming with me? And it's got all the trappings of all the modern marriage proposals that you see. Same thing with prom. So I'm going to ask you to go with me, and it's going to be a big deal, and it needs to be really, really romantic, or somehow like it's got to be a big deal. Of course, it's got to be social media worthy, all those kind of things. So is that wrong? That's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. What we are concerned about as we see these is that we're taking very young people and we're kind of wrapping all that in the trappings of marriage. And we're wrapping it in the trappings of romanticism. And then when you and I didn't talk about this, but when you combine that with increasingly seductive homecoming dresses,
Right.
then, you see the problem here. So
Right.
this is like, okay, this is a sign that things somehow are a little off.
Right.
I mean, really, like I think back to the Wonder Years, and my thoughts about
I do.
Kevin and Winnie, and
I do.
and anyway,
And the French girl.
and the French girl,
Yeah.
and we won't go. No time to go into that today. But any of you out there who watched Wonder Years growing up, then you'll feel the same way that I do. Should have left Winnie a long time ago. The French girl, man, I can't believe you missed out on that opportunity. But boy, that was it was very young. It was very innocent. It was very much like two young people talking to each other. It didn't feel like an adult thing.
It didn't feel like grown-ups in a romance novel.
It did not.
And so that's the thing is, and you said it very well when you said we are combining scantily clad, dressed like adult women for the bedroom.
Really ways that adult women shouldn't dress.
Right, for the bedroom, with over-romanticized young men behaving like Prince Charming-esque. And so you're basically you're feeding both of these young people the fantasy of this sexualized culture.
Right. So just to be clear and just to be direct, young men, you may have the greatest, sweetest young man there's ever been. Once his body starts changing, he desires to see scantily clad women. And that's a God-given desire, because one day he's going to be married and he needs to see his wife in ways and settings and clothing that no other person will see her in. Mm-hmm. And that is a perfectly God-honoring desire for him to have. Now he's going to fight that desire, and most of his life, really. But that's his desire. He has this built-in desire, God-given, but perverted by sin, to see women in scantily clad outfits. And there is a sexualized component to that is limited. It is supposed to be, in God's design, limited only to marriage. Young women are designed by God to desire somebody who loves them, who pursues them, who wants them, who goes out of their way to make a big deal for them. And there's a sexualized component to that, right, that I think a lot of people don't realize and a lot of people miss. It's why pornography for women most often is a romance novel.
Right.
That describes the act rather than visualizing the act.
Right.
And so we're taking those and we're pushing those to younger and younger ages. We're not in any way, let me say it one more time, please listen to me. We are not saying that a homecoming proposal or a prom proposal is somehow pornographic.
Right.
We're not saying that at all. What we're saying is the prevalence of those more and more, and the excitement of the adults around all those things, I think those are tipping the hands of our culture a little bit more and showing our cards that there's a bigger problem here.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little more about those specific things through the list. But when we talk about how to solve this equation, we do have four tips.
Four ways.
4 ways that you could address this equation and try to untangle some of this. The first one is to deal with your own personal misconceptions about sex and romance. And this really kind of, goes to what you were just saying. one of them, I think I'll speak for the ladies' side, and then maybe you can
Okay.
speak for the man's side. So for the ladies' side, with our own personal misconceptions of romance and sex, is that sex is only really good when it's on a candlelit beach. When it's perfectly timed, the environment is perfect, the atmosphere is perfect, everything's been just romanticized to the point where that's the only time when it's good.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to think about where would humanity be if sex only occurred in such romantic environments?
Right.
We would not have existed very long,
Right.
because those environments are few and far between. And if that's your sex life inside of marriage, well, we only have sex when it's a very romantic environment and it's everything looks just the way it ought to and all that stuff, then you're not going to have a very healthy sex life.
Right.
On the men's side, we're sold the lie that sex is only good when everybody that's involved in the sex looks like they stepped out of an American Eagle, ad from the mid 90s. Like it's all about the look, all about how the person looks. Even for men, how they look, how the wife looks, and that sex can only be good in those settings. And those are just lies we've believed about sex that are just not true. So you got to deal with your own lies. If you're going to help kind of solve this equation, we're gonna reset this equation. We've got to deal with the sexualized culture first. Our thoughts about the sexualized culture.
We also need to be intentional to evaluate our influences, both past and present. So we need to think back on how much did those princess movies dictate
Right.
what I believe about who I should, how I should interact with men, and how much do I let these influences in, and how have they shaped me, and how am I allowing them to continue to shape me? Like I said, it's not a bad thing to watch The Little Mermaid, but we all need to be able to say at the end of the movie, you have the conversation. She was not obedient. She was not respectful.
Right.
She was very rebellious, and so it's just healthy to say, where are these influences coming from? How am I being shaped? How did I come to think what I think about sex and romance? And why is it that I still think? What are shaping my current ideas?
Starting with the parents, so that you're better equipped
Right.
to disciple your children. Okay,
Right.
What's next?
All right. So second would be to remember the boundaries that God has given and trust that his boundaries really do lead to life. So when we think about, commandments or laws or rules or boundaries, so often we think, oh, God is trying to keep me from something. But the reality is those boundaries, those rules, those commandments, those things have been set up to protect us and to lead us to life. And when we don't see it that way, then we're only feeding this equation.
I think what we're saying is on the world side, they're trying to pour some things in, and we've got to reject that. So we've got to say we're not going to let these misconceptions come in. So, but in order to do that, we've got to grab on to something. We're going to grab on to the things that God has said about these ideas, marriage and romance and sex, and we're gonna grab a hold of those things, and we're gonna learn from those things. We're going to see those boundaries, and we're going to realize, like you said, that those boundaries do lead to life, that really is where life is found.
Right.
So much of the Christian life comes down to believing that God's way leads to life despite evidence, it seems, to the contrary.
Yeah.
That regardless of what everybody around me is saying, God's way actually does lead to life.
Right.
That's so much of the Christian life comes down
And
to that.
one way to do this as parents is when issues like this come up through movies, through exposure to just life and living and seeing people, having conversations with our kids and saying, God has intended for you to have an amazing romantic relationship with a man one day when he's your husband. And God has intended for you to have an amazing physical relationship with a woman one day when she's your wife. Not saying those things are terrible. Romance is terrible. Physical intimacy is terrible. But saying those things are reserved for your marriage. And God has that special plan for you. And that is going to be amazing for you one day. But it's not today.
There's a lot of incorrect criticism of the purity culture.
Right.
That says, well, the purity culture says sex is bad, 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 bad. I grew up in the purity culture. I never got that message.
I didn't either.
I got the message that sex was beautiful and good and healthy and helpful and desirable and pleasurable all inside of marriage.
Right.
That's the message that I got, and that's the message that we want to communicate.
That's the message that Scripture communicates.
That's the message that Scripture communicates.
Yeah.
All right, what have we got next?
Okay, we also need to look closely at the traps that are being set for us and for our children. And
So there's Disney movies everywhere.
Right. And that goes back to the specific example of the hoco-propo and the promposals, is we have to be so careful to sniff out opportunities to be able to dive into this culture. So I agree with you 100%. If done well and if handled rightly as parents, nothing wrong with these special ways of inviting a young lady to accompany a young man on a dance. But what we don't want is for this to be an opportunity for us to jump off of a cliff into what could be a really big problem. And so being able to just have those conversations and say, here are the lines that we believe don't need to be crossed, as your parents, these are the lines that we believe are there. And honestly, I think it's a great thing to have more of a formality in the asking for a dance or for a special event. I think that's actually a move in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think back on another one of these great romanticized films, Pride and Prejudice, which our family really loves. There was a formality in that time period where the gentleman would go to the father and ask the father's permission to be able to dance with the young lady. And these were the environments where they would court one another, get to know one another. Relationships might begin at these, village-wide dances and things like that. And so I think there's something to that formality and even showing honor and respect to the family members and particularly the father. So I'm just wondering how many of these hoco-propo and promposals the father gets a poster first before the daughter's approached.
So I would say that if your hoco-propo or promposal goes like this, the young man who is going to need to be 15, 16, 17 at least at this point, has shown himself to be a responsible young man, goes and sits down with the father in a formal way and says, hey, I would like to ask your daughter to go to homecoming with me. And the father and the prospective homecoming date have a good conversation. And then come to find out for Christians that the young man is a solid follower of Christ. They have a discussion about how he's growing in Christ, what his Bible reading was for that morning, and I'll just give a pro tip. Just in case, just on the off chance somebody comes to date my daughters at some point in the future, and they happen to listen to this, I'm going to ask you what you read in God's Word that morning and what your prayer time was like. I'm going to ask that question. And, if I get a blank stare, then that's not going to end well for you. I do not want someone coming to date my daughter who did not that day spend time in God's Word and prayer. And so, all right, so I'm walking through that. All right, this guy's like a serious follower of Christ, okay? He really is walking with the Lord. And then they go to a dance where it's all appropriate and good dancing. Everyone's appropriately dressed.
The music's not
The
singing about
music
sexual
is not.
acts.
Listen, and that music, let me just be clear. That music is satanic. So when you're listening to music that is describing sexual acts in detail, that you can call it whatever you want to. It is satanic music. It is of Satan. Satan is pouring information into the ears of your kids in an over-sexualized environment. So yeah, you go to a place where all the music is good and pure, all the dancing is good and pure. You come straight home from the dance at a good time. You don't stop by some place and go parking. Then hey, homecoming proposal away. But we all know that is not the environment, right, and that's not what's being done overall. So as parents, as Christian parents, we're really swimming upstream in all this. Yeah. So we've got to be so intentional, which I think leads to the fourth point.
Yeah, so be intentional and creative to point to truth in these moments. So when these moments are happening, stop and talk about them and think through them and say, okay, well, what do we believe about these things? And identifying those traps, and number 3 is going to help you say, well, what are the possible dangers that might come out of this, and how could we prevent that?
And how can we redeem this moment?
Yeah.
How can we pull this back over within the boundaries, within something that's going to promote something good?
That's right. Let's promote holiness. Let's promote joy and love and life and the things that are lovely, the things that are pure, the things that are worthy of praise, that are honorable, that are just. Let's think about those things and let's feed those things to our children and to their friends and their relationships.
So coming back to hoco propo, promposals. You come back to that moment. What we're suggesting, to be clear, is not that you say to your children, hey, none of that. What we're saying is that you take that moment and say, okay, let's think through this. How could this look God-honoring?
Right.
How could this be a moment of where you're redeeming back from the culture what it has stolen and sullied and made ugly and perverted? How can you take that back and make this something that is pure and lovely and good? How do we do that in this moment? And how do we use this to set proper expectations and proper boundaries? How do we have all these conversations? And I know, like, people probably think you can't have those kind of conversations with teenagers. Why wouldn't you have those conversations with teenagers? Are they going to think it's lame? I'm sure they will. Are they going to think it's like, wow, Mom, you are not cool at all? I'm going to tell you, if you're cool as a mom, you're doing something wrong. If, like, your 14-year-old just thinks you're the coolest mom ever, then you're probably doing something wrong. You better be lame to your kids. You better be a joy kill to your kids. You better be the one who takes away some of their fun, because I'm telling you, the kind of fun that a 13, 14, 15-year-old comes up with is not always the best kind of fun.
Well, and they need truth to live on. They need truth. And not that you can't have fun moments, but they need truth. And we cannot compromise truth for fun. And, I mean, I hate to say this, but our kids have these conversations. I mean,
Yeah,
I
we do
hate
have
to,
these conversations.
I hate to be like, well, we can do it. We do it. We do it. I mean,
Yeah.
we sit down and have these kind of conversations all the time. And our
We
children,
have to.
We have to.
Because we're the parents.
If we don't, who's going to have these conversations
Other
with them?
people,
How are
plenty of
they-
other people are waiting in
but
line
not with the truth.
to have these conversations with your children, who are not going to have them in a way that you wish. And I
Yeah.
do think parents in the teenage years feel like they're handcuffed and they have to step back and not be a part of their kid's life because they might push them away. I think part of the reason why teenagers get pushed away is because they're looking for answers everywhere else,
Yeah.
and their parents don't step into the tough
They don't want to talk
places
about those hard
and
things.
have the tough conversations.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways you can push your teenagers away is by not stepping into these spaces.
Right.
And here's the thing, we all know this. Lame parents come along and kill all the fun and all this and all that and set all the rules. And you know what teenagers do? They have fun anyway.
Yeah.
So even with all of our lame rules and all of our, like, we're killing this or killing that, they're still going to have fun.
They do.
Even if they think it's lame, whatever we're making them do, they're
And
still going to have fun.
and they grow up and become adults who look
Yeah.
back and see, wow, I'm really grateful that my parents loved me enough to guide me and keep me in truth.
All right, so we're working against this formula.
Yes.
And once again, we're looking for names for this formula.
I like
so
the word theorem to be
theorem.
included.
Oh, yeah, it's got to be a theorem.
But our last name doesn't really rhyme with theorem.
Yeah.
Like
Allen theorem.
Yeah.
When I was in college, shout out to a friend of mine, Adam Clay. We created the Clay-Allen theorem, or the Allen-Clay theorem, just depends.
Yeah.
And that was something that we
But
came up
we're
with.
Allen
and we
and
created.
Allen.
Allen and Allen. A squared theorem. We'll see.
Okay.
I think our listeners are going to have some better ideas than
Yeah.
we
Well, we would love your feedback on that because we're it's fresh.
It is.
It's a fresh theorem.
So it is.
The ideas aren't so fresh. They've been around for a while, but
growing physical maturity minus increased responsibility multiplied by sexualized culture equals disaster.
yeah.